Now, everybody knows about the famous NASA moon landings, especially the first trip that Neil Armstrong took us all to the moon. But what if I told you there was a NASA moon landing footage that the government has been hiding from us? From bad weather to mysterious explosions. These are the most unbelievable NASA footage that has been hidden. In the year 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human being to walk on the moon. This was a landmark achievement for NASA and the United States government, and the broadcast of the NASA livestream from the event has become one of the most important videos in the history of mankind. However, some of the footage that NASA transmitted to the world was degraded. What the world saw on their television sets was a blocky picture of the moon landings, but the original footage was much clearer. While NASA claimed that this was done so they could better transmit the signal, some believe that NASA cut the quality of the transmission on purpose. They kept the quality low so that they wouldn't be able to use the footage to fake future videos. The reason for this was that NASA didn't want to be accused of faking the moon landings again. But sometimes the transmission wasn't degraded. Sometimes it was sabotaged. During the Apollo 12 mission, NASA's astronauts flew to the moon and landed on it. Everything was going according to plan until they were ready to lift off and go home. As the astronauts were getting ready to leave the moon, they planned to leave behind an American flag that would flutter gently in the wind as a symbol of freedom. To make this happen, they placed a telescopic pole with a hook on the flag to make it appear to be waving in the wind. However, unknown to them, this plan backfired. The pole and the hook used to hold the flag out were clearly visible to anyone watching on television. While NASA attempted to hide this embarrassing mistake, it was too late. Millions of Americans saw the pole that held out the flag. While some people believe it was an attempt by NASA to make the moon landings seem more impressive than they were, others believed it was a deliberate attempt to deceive them. This brings us to our next video of NASA moon landings footage that the government has been hiding from us. For the past several decades, NASA has released thousands of photographs from the moon landings. Many of these photographs show the astronauts exploring the moon and planting flags in the lunar soil. However, there are a select few photographs that NASA refuses to release to the public. Most recently, they refused to release the photograph of an astronaut's helmet that appeared to show a structure on the moon. These structures are similar to buildings that we build on Earth, but these buildings on the moon are unlike anything we could create with our current technology. If NASA has nothing to hide, why are they hiding these photographs? Some believe that these images show structures on the moon left behind by aliens. After all, NASA hasn't exactly been forthcoming about aliens in the past. While some say that these structures look more like natural rock formations than alien architecture, others see it as NASA trying to cover up the truth about aliens and the moon landings. It's not just the structures on the moon that NASA doesn't want us to see. NASA also keeps a close watch on what happens on live stream. When Neil Armstrong first stepped foot on the moon, he spoke the famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." While this is one of the most iconic lines in the history of mankind, what if I told you that it almost didn't happen? The transmissions between Armstrong and Mission Control in Houston were scrambled during the landing, and Mission Control thought that Armstrong had died as he prepared to land on the moon. When Mission Control realized that Armstrong was still alive, they wanted to stop the broadcast so that they could fix whatever caused the problem. However, Armstrong knew that if he stopped broadcasting, that billions of people would assume that he died. So he ignored the commands from Mission Control and continued broadcasting. This allowed the world to continue hearing what was happening on the moon as it unfolded. However, some believe that this wasn't a heroic move by Armstrong, but a secret plot by NASA to keep the public in the dark about what really happened on the moon. While we will never know what the real story behind the communications problems is, the evidence that NASA continues to cover up what happened during the moon landings is all around us. Just look at the quality of the moon landing footage. Before the Space Shuttle program was canceled in 2011, NASA ran a program called the External Tank Foam Project. Their goal was to attach a coating to the outside of the Shuttle's fuel tank to protect it from the heat that is created during launch. The project began in 2002, and by 2005, they were confident that they had solved the problem. However, on February 2003, the Columbia disaster destroyed the space shuttle and killed all 7 astronauts on board. An investigation into the incident determined that a piece of foam that fell off of the shuttle's fuel tank played a major role in the destruction of the vehicle. NASA realized that this was an extremely serious problem that threatened the lives of every astronaut in the Space Shuttle program. However, they refused to cancel any of the upcoming missions. Instead, they hid the damage to the shuttles and sent them into space anyway. Even worse, NASA kept the incidents quiet and tried to convince the public that the program was safer than ever. After all, the last thing NASA needed was for the public to find out that they were risking the lives of the astronauts in order to keep the program running. Fortunately, they were eventually caught and the Space Shuttle program was canceled. And if you think NASA has covered up all the weird things they've seen on the moon, think again. You may not realize it, but a lot of what NASA does is funded by the government. And whenever you get funding from the government, you have to follow certain rules and regulations. These rules and regulations include giving the public access to the work that you do. NASA has always hated this rule because it prevents them from covering up the strange things they've seen and learned over the years. However, one NASA employee decided that they had enough and leaked some of the most sensitive documents NASA had ever seen. The individual responsible was a NASA scientist named Carl Wolf. Carlson worked at NASA for several years helping them analyze satellite images. However, he had a habit of leaking the photos he worked with to the media. Over the years, he provided the public with images of the moon and Mars that NASA had never intended for us to see. The images included photos of an alien vehicle on the moon, alien structures on Mars, and even photos of UFOs entering our atmosphere. Each of these revelations shook the world and drew the attention of the media. But NASA was furious with Carl and fired him on the spot. They then sued him for leaking the confidential information and forced him to return the documents. However, that didn't stop Carl from continuing to leak information about NASA. He continued to provide the public with images of the moon, Mars, and other planets that NASA didn't want them to see. However, these